If you just look at the headlines shaping the start of 2026, you see this incredible tension. On one side, you have these massive infrastructure projects, hundreds of millions of dollars being stopped dead in their tracks.
And on the other, you have engineers making these tiny, almost invisible tweaks to math that, revolutionize energy use in something like an autonomous car.
It's a total study in extremes. You've got this macro level political chaos hitting the power grid, and at the same time, this micro level computational design optimizing every single movement.
All of it playing out against, well, a backdrop of some really historic shifts in the financial markets.
Exactly. So our mission in this deep dive is to pull all of that together. We're cutting through a stack of sources covering three major and I think interconnected areas. First up, this high-stakes legal battle that has just frozen a critical clean energy project.
Then we'll get into a cutting-edge optimization model that's teaching ADs how to drive with true efficiency.
And finally, we'll look at the big market milestones and leadership changes that are really redefining the financial world as we speak.
And we're going beyond just the headlines here. We're trying to extract the why and the so what, so you can walk away with not just the facts, but the context for why all these different stories really do define our immediate future.
Okay, let's unpack this and start with that massive collision between policy and infrastructure. We're heading to the East Coast, about 15 nautical miles off the shore of Rhode Island. That's where the Revolution Wind project is, well, it's completely paralyzed right now.
And paralyzed is the right word. This isn't some project on a drawing board. Construction's been going since 2023, and it's something like 80% complete.
80%?
Yeah. We're talking 45 of the 65 giant turbines are already standing there, basically ready to spin.
The stakes here are they're huge. Not just for the developer, but really for the stability of that entire region. This thing is designed to deliver 704 megawatts of power.
Which is enough for, what, 350,000 homes?
Exactly. 350,000 homes. That's around 2.5% of the entire New England electricity supply. And it's not speculative power, it's secured. Locked in with power purchase agreements with utilities in Connecticut and Rhode Island.
But despite all that, despite being almost finished, the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, issued an indefinite stop work order on August 22nd, 2025.
Okay, an indefinite halt on a project that's so close to the finish line that demands a really clear reason. What did the federal government say?
Well, that's the core of the problem, really. The order was extremely abstract. It just cited BOEM's authority under the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, the OCSLA,
Right.
which, gives them the power to protect the environment, national security, things like that. But, and this is the crucial part, the order didn't identify any specific imminent threat. No concrete legal violation that would trigger such a drastic move.
So this is where the legal battle really begins. Connecticut and Rhode Island, they didn't wait. They sued the federal government. And they're leaning on the Administrative Procedure Act, the APA, arguing the whole order is arbitrary and capricious.
Right. And arbitrary and capricious is, it's very strong legal language.
Yeah.
It basically means the government acted without a rational explanation. The states argue this on three main grounds.
Okay.
First, like we said, the lack of any specific threat. Second, it just throws out a 9-year regulatory process. I mean, a process that ended with a 2,800-page final environmental impact statement that the federal government itself approved.
But couldn't the feds just argue that national security is inherently sensitive, that, they can't spell out the reason publicly?
They could try, but the state's third point hits that head on. They call it their deep reliance interests. This isn't just about paperwork. The states have put real money down.
How much money?
Well, Connecticut invested over $210 million to redevelop its state pier terminal specifically to handle these massive wind components. Rhode Island, another $40 million into its ports.
So they made huge infrastructure bets based on a predictable regulatory process. And it's not just the money, is it? It's about meeting their own legal mandates.
Exactly. Rhode Island has a law that says it must get to 100% renewable energy by 2033. Connecticut has to be 100% greenhouse gas free by 2040. They literally can't hit those public goals if this power isn't flowing.
And the grid itself is at risk.
The impact is immediate. The regional operator, ISO New England, put out a warning. They said without Revolution Wind, the region's reserve power margin is estimated to drop pretty significantly. And that increases the risk of disruption, especially during peak demand in the winter or a summer heat wave.
This policy conflict is so stark. We know the stop work order came after President Trump's January 2025 wind memorandum, which put a halt on new offshore wind leasing.
But what's so fascinating is the contradiction inside that same directive. At the very same time, the administration halted this project, an 80% finished clean energy project. They declared a national energy emergency,
An emergency.
an emergency that was then used to expedite environmental reviews for other domestic energy projects. We're talking fossil fuels primarily.
So let me get this straight. They're claiming an emergency justifies fast-tracking permits for one kind of energy, saying they can do a full environmental review in 28 days,
A process that usually takes 2 years, yeah.
while at the same time stopping a clean energy project that the states are desperate for.
That's the tension at the heart of the lawsuit. The outcome here is going to set a major precedent for how much anyone, states, utilities, investors can rely on these multi-year federal approvals. It puts the whole idea of a predictable regulatory environment into question.
It's a huge story. Okay, let's pivot completely. We're moving from billion-dollar infrastructure problems to micro-level engineering solutions, specifically in autonomous driving.
Right. This is the opposite end of the energy spectrum.
Yeah.
It's about how to be maximally efficient at the point of use, which is, absolutely critical for making electric AVs viable. The challenge has always been that true eco-driving optimization. Just computationally expensive. It's too slow for real time.
So the engineers needed a shortcut, a way to simplify the math without, losing the benefit. What's the big idea here?
They came up with a new concept they call PCI, or positive control inputs, part of a framework they built called Eco Plus Peak. And instead of trying to calculate every single force all at once, they made a really smart choice. They decided to minimize only the positive control effort.
Positive control, so you just mean minimizing acceleration.
Precisely. Acceleration is the energy guzzler in driving. It's when you're actively pouring in energy to fight inertia, air resistance, all of it. So if you can minimize that positive input, you directly minimize how much energy you use overall.
So that sounds like they take that old human driving trick, pulse and glide, and basically turned it into a mathematical formula for a robot to use.
That's exactly the inspiration. The ECO Plus framework formalizes this for an AV traveling a set distance, and it bakes in all the real-world stuff. Passenger comfort, so limits on jerk, safety, so time gaps from the car ahead, and all the resistive forces.
Including that really tricky one, aerodynamic drag, which has that quadratic term, the one with a vehicle speed squared.
And that quadratic term is what makes the math so hard. It makes the problem nonlinear and very, very slow to solve. So the real genius here wasn't in the physics, it was in how they handled the math. They approximated those complex, curvy, quadratic constraints using what are called piecewise affine segments, PWA.
Okay, piecewise affine. For those of us who aren't mathematicians, what does that mean for actually solving the problem?
Think of it like this. Instead of trying to map the exact complex curve of drag resistance, which takes a ton of computing time, they basically used a series of simple straight-line steps to approximate that curve.
Yeah.
By turning that complicated curve into a bunch of simple straight lines, they transformed the whole problem into something called a linear program, or LP, which is computationally super efficient.
That is so clever. They gave up a tiny bit of mathematical perfection for a massive gain in computational speed. So what was the payoff?
It was a total game changer for a real-time system. That PWA approximation gave them an average speed up of 36.9% in execution time.
Oh.
And this is the key, that speed came with a negligible difference in the quality of the solution. We're talking less than a 0.4% deviation from the perfect answer.
So almost 40% faster for basically the exact same result. That's the difference between a system that's practical on traffic and one that's just a lab experiment.
And when they tested it, EcoBio Plus consistently delivered the lowest energy consumption for both battery electric and internal combustion vehicles. It just proved that focusing only on minimizing that positive energy input is a winning strategy no matter what's under the hood.
It's just fascinating. Efficiency found in a billion-dollar contract and in a simple math trick. Okay, let's zoom out completely now and look at the financial landscape that is defining the start of 2026. This is where we see the capital moving and historic leadership changing.
And we have to start with the huge market milestone over in the UK. On January 2nd, 2026, the FTSE 100, that's London's blue chip index, it broke 10,000 points for the very first time. It hit a high of 10,046.
And that capped an incredible run, right? The index was up something like 21.5% over the previous year. What was driving that rally?
Well, the global optimism around AI definitely helped, but a big factor is just the makeup of the FTSE. It's heavily weighted with international commodity giants, mining companies, energy companies. That rally signals a really sustained confidence in hard assets and the global energy supply chain.
Meanwhile, back in the U.S., one of the most watched transitions in, well, modern financial history has finally become official, the post-Buffett era at Berkshire Hathaway.
Yes. On January 1st, Greg Abel, a 63-year-old veteran from Berkshire's energy business, he officially took over as CEO. Warren Buffett is still chairman at 95 years old. And the market reaction was very stable. Shares dipped just a tiny bit, which is really a testament to decades of succession planning.
But Abel inherits what you could call either a massive opportunity or a massive problem. A record $382 billion cash reserve. That is the $382 billion question that's going to define his first few years.
Absolutely. The pressure is on, and analysts want to know the plan. He basically has two big choices. One, go for a mega acquisition, probably a huge utility or energy company, the traditional Berkshire move. Or two, he could do something revolutionary for Berkshire. Initiate the company's first ever regular dividend, return that cash to shareholders. That would fundamentally change the company's whole investor profile.
And we saw the groundwork for this shift being laid late last year, in Q4 2025. Berkshire made a huge move, slashing its massive long-held stake in Apple by over 70%.
It was a really symbolic move, reducing that reliance on a single tech giant that had become such a huge part of Berkshire's value. And at the same time, they started a big new position, $4.9 billion in Alphabet, Google's parent. It's a rebalancing, a signal of diversification for the Abel era.
And speaking of paradigm shifts, we saw a massive one last year in the global electric vehicle market.
Yeah, a huge one. China's BYD officially took the crown from Tesla as the world's largest seller of EVs in 2025. BYD sold 2.26 million vehicles. Tesla sold 1.64 million.
And for Tesla, that 1.64 million was their second straight year of declining deliveries. What are the big factors behind that fundamental shift?
It's really a mix of policy and fierce competition. In the U.S., Tesla was facing expiring tax credits, which put a lot of pressure on their pricing. At the same time, you have this rising, incredibly competitive international market, especially from Chinese manufacturers who just have better access to raw materials and localized supply chains. Tesla just couldn't hold on to its dominance.
It's a huge lesson in how fast market leadership can evaporate.
All right, let's finish up with a more human-scale corporate story, the turnaround at Red Lobster.
It's a really audacious story of just operational rigor. The CEO, Damola Adamolekun, he led the chain out of Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And his strategy was all about making smart cuts and getting smart investment.
So cuts being closing over 100 locations that weren't performing, painful but necessary. And investments, meaning he secured $60 million for modernization.
But crucially, they refocused the brand on what customers actually wanted. They introduced popular new things, like a Southern-style crab fest. But the biggest challenge, and maybe the biggest lesson, was dealing with their famous margin killer.
The endless shrimp promotion. A cultural icon, but a financial disaster.
It was an operational nightmare, so they replaced it with something much more balanced. The $15.99 Ultimate Spendless Shrimp Deal. It still gives customers that feeling of value, but it protects their profit margins. That kind of turnaround, it shows you sometimes have to sacrifice a cultural touchstone for the health of the balance sheet. And he's targeting 43% profitability growth by 2027. It's all about long-term stability over short-term gimmicks.
So when we put all these pieces together, what does it all mean? We started with state governments fighting the federal government in court. Why? Because decades of their planning, millions in their investments, it all relies on predictable outcomes. The success of Revolution Wind is tied to concrete assets, stable contracts.
Then we jumped into engineering, where we saw people using pure mathematical ingenuity to make autonomous systems hyper-efficient, trading a little bit of perfection for a lot of critical speed, making every single joule of energy count.
And we ended by looking at these monumental shifts in global wealth. The post-Buffett era, the FTSE at 10,000, Tesla losing its crown. These dynamics are defined by radical volatility, by constant speculation.
Which I think raises a really important question that connects all three of these stories. The public good, clean energy, stable infrastructure, safe roads, all of that depends on predictability, on stability, on reliable contracts.
But the economic engine that drives global wealth, that includes that $382 billion Greg Abel is now controlling, that engine is defined by radical volatility, market risk, unrealized gains. So what happens when the public's fundamental need for stable, concrete assets is constantly being undermined by the speculative nature of the wealth that controls the economy?
That tension, The gap between stability and volatility, that seems to be the defining feature of our immediate future.
And the outcomes of these individual stories are only going to make that divide deeper.
Something for you to mull over until our next deep dive. Thanks for joining us.